legislative priorities, but specifically the land use bill. So I want to thank my committee members and everyone who is online. I think we have everybody here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We don't have any consent items. We're going to get a legislative update from Peggy. I see Peggy, Cammie, and are on the line. So Peggy?
Sure, happy to join in. Thank you again also for visiting today on this bill. As you know, it was introduced last week, 106 pages. I know Liz and her team have jumped at it to try to get some good analysis for us as we move forward in the session. We've got a meeting this afternoon at noon with CML to get some information from them. They've got an analysis and a toolkit that they are sharing with their members as well as the lobbyists. Our hope is to be able to have a clear understanding leaving this meeting today on what our priority issues are for the city, so that as we talk to legislators, particularly those in our delegation, and those that we believe are going to be swing votes on this issue, that we're able to communicate those concerns and potential solutions effectively to them. So appreciated everybody's time this morning.
Okay, thank you, Peggy. Is there anything else that Tatsi or Cammie would like to speak before we move forward with the with discussing the land use bill? Okay, Liz.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. I want to thank everyone again for making time to really look at this bill. Staff has been working so hard to provide everyone an analysis and really detail where our specific concerns are within this legislation. So a big shout out to staff for helping me get all this put together for you all. So how I kind of wanted to go through this, if that's all right with everyone, is I want to do an overview of what the bill is. So a quick summary, call out some specific areas where we have the most concerns, and then dive into a little bit more of where staff has specific concerns in those areas. And I'll pause between each item just so if there are any questions, you guys have time and we're able to ask. We also have a lot of staff here that can help answer any more specific questions that I might not in particular have answers to. So if that sounds okay with everyone, we can get started. Great. Okay, so as Peggy mentioned, the land use bill is a very nice, over 100 pages long. There are a multitude of different sections in here, 7 in particular, but I want to kind of go over some key details of the package and then get kind of into each different section, what it means, and what the state is looking to try and do with this type of legislation. So one of the key points that I want you all to be aware of is that the state is going to kind of divide different municipalities into tiers. So there'll be tier 1, tier 2, and then the Rural Resort Job Center. So as Aurora, we are going to be considered tier 1. And what that means to be considered tier 1 is that we have a population greater than 1 million and within a census urbanized area with greater than 75,000 population. And within that, at least 1,000 municipal population, or in a population less than 1 million and within a municipal population greater than 25,000. So per staff analysis, we do fall into the tier 1 municipality category. So all of the zoning changes and other changes proposed in this legislation, most of it will apply to us, just so you're all aware of what that would mean. There are some exceptions and extensions in the bill, specifically regarding water supply and infrastructure, and we can apply for an extension or an exemption to some provisions in the bill in specific areas if we can demonstrate that water, sewer, or stormwater services are currently or expected to become deficient. As we've been doing a lot of pipeline replacements, I'm not sure how much we will be able to utilize this provision, but I do want to let you know that it is in there. The last thing that I really want to call out before we dive into some details is there are 2 coding changes within this bill. So there's what's called a flexible option or the model option. So what this means is the state is requiring municipalities to have a minimum standard zoning code to be adopted that would make us in compliance with this bill. And that's kind of what this flexible option is, just some of the changes in zoning that the council would have to vote on and implement to be considered in compliance. The model code, however, is if the council or the municipality chooses not to comply with the minimum standards and vote and change zoning codes, the state will come in and kind of take over zoning and implement their model code upon the municipality until they deem the municipality is in compliance with the minimum standards or the flexible option. So that's kind of the major points that I wanted to discuss before I get really into some of these more details. Are there any questions on kind of that section?
Are there any questions from the committee? Councilmember Zvonek, Councilmember Jurinsky, or I see Councilmember Morcano's on here as well.
No, I don't have any at this point.
Okay. Okay, continue, Liz.
Okay, so there are several major parts of this package, each dealing with something that's pretty specific. So the first part is a housing needs assessment and housing needs plan. So the state is going to conduct a housing needs assessment statewide, and they're going to kind of determine some goals or options that municipalities can implement to be able to, increase their affordable housing. So the municipality will need to conduct this housing needs assessment every 5 years. And they are going to need to include how we will realistically provide opportunities for housing needs, how we're complying with zoning requirements in this bill for AUDs, middle housing, transit districts, and key corridors, description and implementation plan for each of those strategies. And addressing, identified income levels and housing needs, an assessment of displacement risk, and then stakeholder engagement conducted. There's also several other details that I will talk a little bit later about in the specific concerns with this report as well, but just wanted to give you a little overview of that. In this sense, the state will also, as I mentioned, be conducting a study to kind of identify housing needs within the state. In this municipality, and as tier one, that would be us, we would need to identify and choose at least two strategies or three strategies if we are a municipality in a transit-oriented community, and we would have to implement them. At this time, just so you are all aware, we do not know what those menu items will be, how many options we will have for those menu items, or what will happen if we're already in compliance or already doing some of these items. And then in addition to that, the state will also kind of conduct an assessment and have options for mitigating displacement. However, we will not be forced or made to comply with those items.
Liz, can I chime in, please? Just for a minute here. Okay, so I know we're going to get to your recommendations at the end, which your recommendation at the very end of what you want the Pfizer committee to consider is,
Yes.
I want to comment on this. I think it's going to be really important, and my colleagues can chime in, that we are doing a lot of this. And I think that needs to be emphasized. And we're doing a lot of this already. And I understand that they want us to do this, but we've done studies. We have our own study. We do this. We have our civic engagement. I guess what my question to you is, because at the end of this, and we can discuss it at the end, but I just want to see where we're going. Is it going to be emphasized when we're advocating for our city, that a lot of the things that we're doing, because you mentioned everything that this is going to include, but we are doing these things. I think where there could be some leverage is as the city is evolving, there could be something that we need to include because of our population, what's going on in our community, the changes and the dynamics. But a lot of this we're doing. So I just wanted to ask you, how is that going to be implemented, or how are we going to strategize with that, of making sure that we're emphasizing the things that the Aurora is doing? And maybe in this particular case, it could be basically how we're evolving as a city. We may need to do a study, or maybe we need to put different gaps that our city is facing. So that's just a comment and also a question.
Of course. Actually, we do specifically detail this in the staff kind of like analysis and recommendations. So in this, we already do a consolidated plan per our association and involvement with HUD. So that is something that's already done. So what we could seek to ask is that instead of, doing this assessment in their terms, we provide them the HUD assessment that we already conduct. Staff had noted that doing these assessments in addition to the ones we do for HUD can potentially be burdensome, as they will be asking for a lot more information. So it just to answer your question a little bit more fully, they want to know, how many permits we've issued, new housing units categorized by structure type, how many the timeframes that we've done, workforce assigned to development, implementation statuses, kind of like geospatial data. So really just a very intensive report. And these things can be accomplished, especially with affordable housing, with what we've been reporting to HUD. So that could be a suggestion that we ask of our electeds to incorporate into the bill.
Okay, I would recommend that. I know at the end you state that you have a general ask about discretionary position with the city staff to make recommendations, but I would have probably like maybe to have more specifics. I definitely would like to maybe make sure that that is emphasized. So just a comment, do any of my colleagues have any comments to this section or what I've stated, or agree or
No,
disagree?
yeah, no, I agree. I think it makes sense to take a look at each of these sections and what we already do and how we potentially already comply. And to your point, maybe it's not a one-for-one compliance, but it seems like it'll be pretty close and maybe sufficient and give. Because ultimately, what I'm most worried about this bill, forget the individual sections, is just the gross overreach of the state kind of mandating things that I think we can get to the same outcome without telling us how to get there specifically. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like some of that work's already been done.
Roberto, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, to your point, Councilmember Lawson and Councilmember Zvonek, I think what we want to do as a lobbying strategy is basically point to them as we're not the poster child for why this bill is. I mean, here's the list in terms of every section of what we're doing, how we're doing it, with the intent of saying we don't need to be we shouldn't be part of that process, or if there's a way to exempt us out. But even then, to just make that point, and we have those through Jessica's shop, we have all of, and Janine's shop, we have a lot of that data that we can put into probably a one-pager or a fact sheet for our lobbyists, and whenever we're doing advocacy, at least with the Aurora delegation, so they can see section by section, here's what's already being done. So this bill shouldn't really apply to us, or we at least to make the point that they're not really impacting Aurora necessarily. I think the bigger thing is the cleanup, right? What are the sections that really shouldn't have some of these elements at all? And Liz will get through them in terms of occupancy, some of the building code stuff, some of the water requirements that are just frankly kind of unworkable. And so if we can clean some of that up, I think would be helpful for staff to be able to have that discretion to work with them to remove that language, amend that language, clean up the language so that we can, I think obviously given the majorities in the governor's support of this, it'll be very difficult to push back on this bill. I think we're looking for an ability to at least improve it to a point where we can workable, understanding that we're already doing a lot of these things. We aren't, I think, the poster child for what this bill is trying, the cities that they're trying to impact. But I agree with Councilmember Zvonek. It's still a big overreach, but trying to make the best of a bad bill.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead and continue, Liz. Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to add that.
I love the discussion. So kind of the next section are two sections that I've kind of combined together in the summary. So they are for accessory dwelling units and middle housing. A bulk of these concerns really surround the small zoning changes that could have a big impact on our community. So just to call out some specific items, this would kind of like give more broad allowances for people to build AUDs and middle housing in different zoning areas. But where we have some specific concerns are the parking code changes. So essentially, the bill details that urban municipalities may not require new off-street parking for these housing types. However, homeowners and developers can provide and do parking at their discretion. And of course, ADA parking requirements are going to apply for all of the parking limitations. The other one is that municipalities have flexibility to regulate short-term rentals or encourage affordability in these housing types, but there is nothing currently in this bill regarding additional regulation of AUDs. So if council would want to take more stringent measures, that would something that the council would have to choose to do, but is not currently in this bill. As I kind of mentioned in the previous section, if municipalities do not adopt these minimum standard requirements, the state will impose the model code option until the municipality, as deemed by the state, meets the new minimum options there. So there are kind of areas in here where staff has pulled out specific elements and detailed them on these coding and zoning changes, but this is just a summary overview. So I'm going to keep moving on if we don't have any questions on that in particular.
Is there any questions from the committee? Councilmember Marcano? Okay, we'll just move. Oh, Councilmember Zvonek.
Oh, no, none for me. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Okay, continue, Liz.
Okay, so the next section is surrounding transient-oriented communities and key corridors. That's parts 4 and 5. So transient-oriented communities have a stringent definition as detailed in the summary as well. And they have to have an overall zoning that meets a minimum of a gross density of 30 units per acre. Municipalities will have to approve multifamily housing in these areas, and the same parking limitations are also imposed, where municipalities may not require new off-street parking for these housing types, but that is up to the discretion of developers to do. If these municipalities do not adopt the minimum standards, the default option model code that the state will impose will also go into effect until the state deems that the municipality is in compliance. And then with the key corridors, so this designation is based on kind of current or existing transit plans and transit services. And this is not going to apply to future increases in transit beyond what is already kind of like currently planned that's done. They do also detail some minimum standards as kind of similarly in the previous sections that I mentioned, must like allowing multifamily housing and then limiting parking options. If we do not comply, we will again default to the model code. So I know I went through that a little quickly, but is there any kind of questions specifically on those sections you would like me to revisit?
Questions from the committee? Councilmember Zvonek, Councilmember Jurinsky?
No, none for me.
Okay.
Okay. The next part, part 6, removing barriers to affordability. So these policies are intended to reduce the cost of housing. So there are several areas here that we have some concerns about that I want to call out for you all. So as a tier 1 municipality, we may not require minimum square footage for residential units, except in situation where the minimum square footage is required for health and safety. However, the definitions and what constitutes health and safety has not been detailed in this legislation specifically. There is also going to be a restriction that municipalities cannot establish or enforce residential occupancy limits based on familiar family relationships. So we do have a couple of specific concerns also called out in this section that are a little bit more detailed than the summary. But are there any questions on that before I move on to the last section?
Any questions?
No, I just want, maybe this is Roberto or staff might know this. Don't a lot of municipalities have those types of restrictions in place on their code that the state would essentially be coming in and just trampling on regardless of home rule?
So I guess to answer your question, the city of Aurora follows the International Residential Code, which is what we utilize to determine, and that code has details on what the minimum square footage requirements are for buildings, and that's kind of what we follow. So as you may guess, we have a couple of concerns not requiring any minimum square footage requirements. And then regarding the occupancy status, it would be helpful for families to,
Please.
oh, sorry. Go
Sorry,
ahead.
this is Jessica Prosser. I'm just going to help with this question if that's okay.
Yes.
So, Councilmember Zvonek, we have our own code related to occupancy, which is outside of the building code. We follow the 150 square feet. And then we also have the number of unrelated persons. We have an occupancy questionnaire, and we do regulate this through code enforcement currently.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Mercano.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. Liz, you've mentioned I guess, document with staff recommendations a couple of times. Was that sent out to committee members?
Yes, it was included in the agenda packet.
Okay, I don't think I got a copy of it. I'm not on the committee, but which is probably why. But could that be forwarded over so I can take a look at that as well?
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Isn't that what we have online when you're talking about these recommendations? What other recommendations, Liz, are we referencing? I thought it was in the packet.
Yes, the recommendations are in the packet.
Okay, that is on the website for the public, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so Councilmember Mercano, it should be on the Pfizer committee area, the agenda that we're discussing today with all of this information.
All right, great, thank you.
The staff comments, just so you're aware, it does begin on page 10 of the agenda. But are there any other questions before I move on?
I have a question on the staff analysis when we get to page 10.
Okay. Great. So moving forward, the last section really has to do with water planning and efficiency. So I will lean on Aurora Water here to kind of detail if they have any kind of like other concerns. Per conversation that I've had with them, there isn't a lot that they are concerned about here, but this section really has to do with a lot of data analysis, planning, and ensuring collaboration between local, regional, and state entities to promote strategic growth and development. So we have to have kind of like plans already in place for our development and for water as well. Per kind of like staff analysis of water, a lot of their concerns has been assuaged through this analysis, and they will not significantly be impacted. Just to note for the committee that there has been discussion of an amendment that already is being worked on surrounding this section. We do not have a copy of that language yet, but just wanting to let you know that amendments are already being discussed. So I'll open it to water here if they want to like include anything else regarding this section specifically.
Is there anyone from the water division that wants to comment on this section? Kathy.
Good morning. Liz laid it out pretty well. As we did our analysis, we didn't find anything that was of concern to try for any amendments. As already noted, we do a lot of this work already. And in Colorado Water Congress on Monday, the governor's office representatives that were outlining this bill for us, they just noted that the water loss audit section was not what they were expecting. And so it's the governor's office that is working on that amendment for that section. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, is there any questions for Kathy?
No.
Okay, continue, Liz.
So that is the end of the bill summary. Thank you all for sitting with me through that. So I do want to move on to the staff analysis and general comments from city departments. Begins on page 10 of the in the agenda packet. So kind of page 10 is a general overview and general comments of the legislation from staff. Page 12 really begins some of the more specific and detailed concerns that I would like to address with the committee. What we've done here is we've pulled out language from the bill specifically as written, and then included kind of what the thoughts are on it, what the concerns that we have are in these very specific areas. As Councilmember Lawson mentioned earlier, we are doing a lot of these activities already within our city, but we think there is an opportunity to clean up the bill, as Roberto mentioned, and really get some clarification on things, maybe exemptions from things, and also just kind of state our concerns with some of the zoning code and safety issues that have been brought about. So Councilmember Lawson, I know you mentioned you had a question on the analysis, so I'll pause if you want to ask that, or I can go ahead and move forward talking about the specific concerns.
I just have one question on from maybe someone from planning and development can address this question. And the reason I'm bringing this up because I have a point to this. On the density piece, can someone from staff give me a definition of what you're talking about I know what you're emphasizing, disproportionary impact disadvantaged neighborhoods. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm going to say a point, but I want to know, what do you mean by that? And I see, that Janine is on. So can you tell me what that means?
Going to see if Mindy, because this one came from her. Mindy, if you're on.
Yeah. Yeah, so the point here is that they're just want to take all single family established neighborhoods and allow for them to allow for increased density. Often through experience, it results in scrapes and rebuilds, and most of the time it's at a market rate kind of development. So you'll see throughout Denver where they're tearing down small homes and putting up 2 duplexes, and it's increasing the property values in the area, and it doesn't stabilize the existing established neighborhoods.
Okay, so the reason I brought that up, I'm glad I didn't know it was more adjusted to the scrape of the neighborhood. I know that in Aurora, and I live in a community, a neighborhood like that, where it has owner-occupied townhomes, condos, and apartments, and it is pretty dense. And we do have outside hedge funds and corporations that come in and try to buy up these neighborhoods or buy up these properties. And these are not scrape, but they're being impacted, and people's rents are going up if people who are renting these places. So when you're saying, and I don't consider the neighborhood or whatever, it's not just disadvantage. It also impacts people who are in the mid-level as
Of
well.
all levels,
So
all
I
levels,
guess, and that's something that's happened in Denver as well, not just, so when you say disproportionately impact disadvantaged neighborhoods, I guess I understand what you're talking about, but I guess I was looking at it from a more of a economic of this impacts neighborhoods. I live in one where
of all neighborhoods,
yeah.
of all neighborhoods. Yeah,
I
we
just
could
think
add that. We could definitely add that.
So
Yeah,
I would
the
just
idea,
like to ask if you could have an addition to that, because that has been a real big issue with outside hedge funds and corporations coming into the communities, regardless of the income, and just trying to buy up these
right,
properties.
and displacing
Yeah,
again
right.
the existing neighborhood.
So
mean,
I would like that to be a little bit more, I mean, it would have to
Yeah.
be up to the committee, but I
I don't
think
know if
that
we
should be
can,
a little bit added to that, so.
yeah, we can, a strategy we've done before is areas of stability and areas of change.
Good,
So,
yeah.
if we could map out areas that we would apply some of this to, that would be a great approach. So,
Okay,
we can
yeah,
work
I
with
think that would be good, so, thank you. Councilmember O'Connell, you have your hand up.
Ma'am. So this is something that we talked quite a bit about before I was on council when we were going through the upzone of original Aurora. And this was one of the concerns that I and a lot of the other folks who showed up to testify laid out, was that if you just blanket upzone existing communities, especially those that have a high concentration of investor-owned properties, what you're basically doing is setting up for quick gentrification and a lot of displacement, and not just of existing residents, but of businesses as well, because this also impacts the value of commercial properties. So I'm wondering if it would be in conflict with the law as it is drafted if we work in some non-displacement provisions to our Unified Development Ordinance to allow folks the right of first return, right of first refusal to just purchase the property outright, things of that nature, with some maybe requirements for phased construction so that we don't, displace businesses and residents without having first a place for them to relocate to. Just curious if that would conflict with the bill as it is drafted, in staff's opinion.
Liz, do you want me to chime in
Yes.
here?
Go ahead,
So
please.
Janine Restad, Director of Planning and Development Services. There is actually another section of the bill that talks about anti-displacement. So I believe just on my 2 readings of the bill, that would be consistent.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We still have to see what their list of anti-displacement is, but as is being discussed here, we're the experts that do this. If we're doing something, it's making our case that it's as good or better than what the state is proposing.
All right. Thank you, Janine.
Is there any other questions from the committee? I'm sorry to kind of barge in on that one, but on that section, and then we can move forward, Liz. Or any of the staff analysis that is on this page, on page 10 through 11, it looks like. Okay. All right, Liz, we'll move forward.
Great. So beginning on page 12 are a lot more of the more specific concerns that staff has with the bill that we've specifically pulled out that have to do with the actual language written, how it's written, and kind of what it means when it gets implemented for the city. So in the first section, I'm kind of going to go through this. I have also included the page numbers of where in the actual bill this language can be found. So if you want to reference that as well, or just see where it is, those page numbers are included for you all if you want it. You don't have to read a whole 100 pages. That's what we're here for. So kind of in the first part here, the state is kind of looking to have a multi-agency advisory committee to make decisions on what they want affordable housing to look like, zoning changes, and have this committee really direct where the bill is going to go. This does not include any of the 3 largest cities, resort cities, or any municipalities. And staff wants to ensure that we have a seat at the table. And we're concerned that we are not already included in the definition of multi-agency advisory committee. So that is something we would look to change. As Janine mentioned, we do have more experience and knowledge with implementing codes. So we feel like we should be at the table for these conversations. So that's kind of like the first definition. The second, and I'll pause. Do you want me to pause after each one or keep going unless you guys have questions specifically? There's a lot in here. I want to be respectful.
Why don't you kind of go through, and then the committee, if they have any questions, they can raise their hand if they have a specific section, and then we can do questions at the end.
Great, wonderful. So the next one is a concern with the definition of townhome. This may seem not or a little bit trivial, but the definitions here in this bill are not consistent with the definitions of townhome found in the International Residential Code. So per code and allowing having spacing between different buildings and not having access to a yard inside or having things in lieu of sprinkler systems, it would be a reduction in standards of our current adopted code. And we've included those current definitions for you in this section as well. There's also some concerns here with fire safety and fire mitigation as well. So after that, moving on to kind of the part 1, which is the housing needs planning. So as Councilmember Lawson and we had the discussion earlier, every 5 years, we will have to submit a housing needs plan on what we are going to develop, do, and adopt regarding affordable housing. We've already been doing this with HUD, so this is something that we could seek an amendment on to submit the report that we also send to HUD. That way there wouldn't be a duplication of work or additional burden on the municipalities.
Can I jump in real quick? Please?
Yeah, Councilmember Jurinsky.
It came up in the chat. PD is asking if they can go ahead and leave this Pfizer meeting. There's an incident that they need to go be briefed on. Can we cut PD loose off of this call, please?
Oh, and they didn't even have to attend. So I apologize for that. Yes, for sure. Thank you, Councilmember Jurinsky, for letting me know.
Okay, so moving forward, the housing needs plan has to include realistic opportunity for development addressing housing needs for persons on different income levels, specifically looking at having a plan for the next 20 years for equitable distribution of housing within the jurisdiction. Where we have concerns with this is that demographic, market economy, development trends, they all can change very rapidly, especially in our state. So the 20-year horizon is recommended to be reduced in time and staff recommends 5 to 10 years, which is 1 or 2 planning cycles, just because of the accelerated change we have seen as a state and as a city. In addition to providing these housing needs plans, the city would also have to engage in several different reporting requirements. As I detailed earlier, it would be the number of permits, number of new housing categorized by type, timeframes of permit reviews, workforce assigned to these projects, implementation of strategies, and zoning information, as well as any intergovernmental agreements that we have entered into. So annual reporting of this heavily detailed assessment staff considers that to be very burdensome to be doing every year, and they do recommend to have reporting less frequently or just limited to other pertinent information for new housing units only. So moving forward into part 2, which is the accessory dwelling units. So the concerns here are with, as I mentioned during the summary, a lot of coding. So making sure that the use by right and that establishing all elements in the minimum standards, and then that we cannot have a requirement for off-street parking. So just so everyone is aware, there are a lot of references to this model code that we have consistent concerns with that are very similarly detailed throughout staff comments. But, we need to have a more deeper dive into these specific codes and how they're going to impact and what we're doing as a city. But the adoption of a minimum code or having minimum standards imposed obviously conflates with our home rule authority. Not to mention that the parking requirements are a specific concern that we have as well. So looking at some of those other minimum standards in the sense of unit sizes, particularly. So this does not take into account like the house size for AUDs or lot configuration or even the character found within the neighborhoods. So the cases of allowing AUDs, there's nothing in there that says AUDs cannot exceed the size of the primary structure either. And then there are concerns that the prohibition of owner occupation requirements can make it more likely for investors to come in and make both of those properties rental units, as was something that was mentioned previously in this conversation. So moving forward, looking specifically at requiring parking as well as the rear setbacks greater than 5 feet for AUDs. So minimum setbacks for AUDs being no more than 5 feet from the property line are a concern, as the IRC allows structures to be less than 5 feet with restrictions on wall openings and prohibits wall openings for walls 3 feet or less from the property line. So the reason they are kind of mandated by code is to reduce the likelihood of fire spreading to different structures. So the closer the houses to each other, the greater the chance the fire can spread from one structure to another. So we would really staff would like to see IRC requirements for fire-related walls and window openings detailed in the code as a safety and fire prevention and mitigation. So moving on to part 3, which is more detailed on middle housing, again, with requiring not allowing municipalities to require off-street parking in connection with any construction. So it's also kind of, staff believes this is overly prescriptive and it doesn't take into account the local impacts of added density. And that staff believes that they should require at least a limited amount of new parking for housing, as many residents still rely on vehicles to commute for work or personal reasons. It is a highly contentious neighborhood issue and not only impacting livability, but the marketability of different housing. So with that, moving forward onto part 4, transit-oriented areas, again, with the parking concerns, just again, not allowing having parking for new buildings or new structures, and really seeking that at least a limited amount of parking for new developments. And then part 5, which is key corridors. So this would really allow kind of, objective procedures to determine whether a project satisfies the model code, which we would have to meet these minimum requirements as throughout for any new developments. And then we, as a municipality, would not be able to adopt, enforce, or enact any local laws that convene the model code or circumvent the model code. So we really have to be in compliance with the flexible option or minimum standards that the state would be requiring. Staff finds these model codes or these minimum standards do not take into account development context, asset access, or physical constraints, or even potentially geographic constraints as well. There should be, at least at minimum, a requirement to allow municipal collaboration on local conditions. So the other concern is that if we have to report to the state what we are doing locally to ensure we're in compliance with the new minimum standards and flexible standards that the state is going to be requiring of us. If we do not meet these minimum standards, then the model code will go into effect immediately for the municipality until DOLA determines that we have adopted laws to be in compliance. So this really does appear to be a state-imposed requirement for inclusionary housing in the model code. So in this, the municipality and staff would seek to have an exemption for the city as we are engaged in Prop 123, and that we already have model codes going into effect to promote affordable housing. And then the last one in this area is kind of really looking at that we are not going to be allowed to enforce residential occupancy limits, specifically regarding the relationships of the occupants of the dwelling. As mentioned a little bit already, by Jessica, so we use the 100 square feet per person per building code. And while having more family relationships in a building could be beneficial for people, having no limit could also be dangerous in terms of just having a lot of people living in one space, and coupling that with the not allowing any minimum room sizes could be a big concern as well. So staff would suggest not going higher than 6 or 8 people living together, no matter the size of the structure, just for some safety reasons. So moving forward with that, and kind of going into that minimum square footage requirement. So as we're not allowed to have a minimum square footage requirement, the only way would be able to allow to do so is for necessity of health and safety of people in the urban municipality. The bill does not detail what health and safety standards would look like. So that is a concern if we bring any of that forward. So the IRC does have minimum room standard requirements, as I mentioned, and they take into account like building factors and interior living environments when kind of developing these codes. So these factors include ceiling height, lighting and ventilation, how these spaces interact and intersect with each other that really can impact the living conditions of the occupants. So in the staff analysis, we have also included for you the IRC codes detailing what these minimum requirements are. So that kind of is a lot. I know, I'm sorry, but that concludes what we've really pulled out and identified from this bill that we have a lot of specific concerns are that I wanted to call out for this committee. So I will stop, and because that's the end of what we have right now, and take any kind of like questions or need for clarification.
Okay. Well, Liz, thank you for giving that update, very long update. I appreciate it. And I want to thank all the city departments for providing input as well on this very in-depth long bill. So does the committee have any questions about any of the recommendations that were made, and if there's any additional things we need to think about from the committee standpoint? Councilmember Zvonek?
Yeah, Councilmember Lawson, thank you. So you know, it isn't uncommon when there's legislation that's this broad and sweeping and has such significant impact. I mean, I don't know, Peggy would know the exact day, I'm sure, but I'm looking at my watch and the date, it's probably only 45 days left in session. I would like to see, and I don't know what CML's position is, but maybe we can start to push and say, let's turn this into a task force. If the governor convened a task force like he did for mental health spending, I think we could come up, pull all the stakeholders together and have a conversation about what is actually needed to be mandated on local governments or potentially mandated and what's not. I just think that this update was very helpful, but it just continually reaffirmed the fact that these are broad, sweeping changes, and the unintended consequences that aren't even being thought about yet, or who knows what. And I don't even know if it's possible. Peggy and the team at the Capitol would have a better idea if there's even a reality that we could go and say, hey, can we push? We're not saying this is a hard no, but can we push pause and have a convening of a task force that will review this over the next year and bring it back next session and maybe have it, you know, cleaned up in a way that you could get all the local governments on the same page, because it's clear that housing is a significant challenge in our state. We have the inventory is low on every spectrum of the housing spectrum. I think there are some state changes that need to be made, and clearly there are some things that local governments can do better. Maybe not us, maybe us too, but I just worry that this could have some significant unintended consequences if it passes as it currently stands. And so I would like to recommend that, or make that a part of our recommendation, that we turn this into a task force.
Peggy or Totsi or Cami, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. This is Peggy. Thank you, Councilman Zvonek. You know, I think at this point, making it a task force or a study is not something that the bill sponsors or the governor's office is considering. That said, as you very well know, as the process moves on and if things start to get dicey and they start to feel like the bill is heading in the wrong direction, that may be something that they would consider accepting as a friendly amendment, frankly. I certainly don't think they're in that position right now, but definitely something that we could keep on the back burner. And as things move on, and you're right, they're going to move pretty quickly, especially when the budget's done here in the next couple weeks. So definitely something for us to consider.
Okay, thanks.
And I see Mac Callison's hand is up. Mac.
Thank you, Chair Lawson. Appreciate that. Matt Callison, Transportation Planning Supervisor, City of Aurora. On another related topic relative to transportation, there seems to be a thread throughout this, certainly a linkage to referencing the multimodal options fund, the state transportation fund, that may also link and tie into eventually the Denver Regional Council of Governments Transportation Improvement Program funding, which we've been successful, highly successful over the last 4 calls of last year and into this year on funding transportation projects and efforts throughout the city. So I think we all want to fully understand and have input and be at the table for that dialogue as well. Just potential consequences, looking into the future on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and Mac, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the analysis that was provided, I didn't see really a lot of that. So I think that that should be something that we should definitely maybe lay out in this recommendation, because transit does have a connection to housing and how we're building. So as we're looking at this analysis, I didn't really see a lot of that input. So I think that that would be kind of important to have in there as well, more so.
Absolutely. We welcome that opportunity. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Mercano.
Thank you, ma'am. So thank you, Liz, and everyone else who was involved in putting this back up together. I really appreciate it. I want to strongly support standardizing references to code back to the IRC. I think it's very strange that we would be deviating from that. That's just going to cause confusion not just from a legal standpoint, but also from the actual construction trades. I think, these are all standards that folks are very familiar with. So deviating from that is just strange in my mind. I do want to go back to the parking issues, because I do appreciate and understand the intent with limiting off-street parking and not requiring that. But I think lower parking in general, especially for infill development, makes a lot of sense. But I don't see here where it really takes into account the reality of development on the periphery of a city, where folks are more than likely going to have inadequate access to public transportation, especially given all the issues with RTD as it stands. So I'd like to see if there might be a willingness to kind of separate the more urban infill, kinds of development versus more suburban and even exurban in some cases when it comes to parking minimums. As much as I would love to believe that we'd be able to just, get folks to change their commuting habits, I don't see that possible or being possible without, a lot of work being done on our public transportation system as it stands. So we
And I
might.
see, oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Morcano, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'm done.
Okay, I see Cindy. Cindy, did you want to comment?
Yeah, actually, we can pull together some language from that with Scott Bauman, our parking and mobility manager. So Liz, if we can just all get with you and we'll work with Scott to separate those two issues. We can certainly do that.
Okay. Is there any other comments from, and those were all good, things that we should probably maybe add to some of these things if the committee agrees. So I guess the first thing I want to do before we get to the bigger question, there was at least 4 different proposals to maybe add some things to our recommendations. Does the committee approve those or would like for the staff or our lobbyists to kind of work on these things and maybe have these additions added to our current recommendations that we have here? Councilmember Zvonek, Councilmember Jurinsky. It was the ones that just were mentioned.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, Councilmember Jurinsky?
So, I mean, I guess for me, I actively oppose this entire bill. So I don't know if you guys are telling me that's just not an option and I'm just not allowed to have that opinion. But I just don't really see, I just actively oppose this bill. So I'm going to actively oppose any amendments to it right now. I mean, we could take a monitor position. I can't get on board with this bill at all.
Okay, so let's go back then. Let's go back. You make a good point. So I guess the first thing that we should probably do, as Councilmember Jurinsky says, is just get a pulse of the committee. And it looks like you actively oppose. I don't actively oppose it. I think that the bill's going to go through. I know we should take a position as a city. I don't agree with what's going on, but it's going to pass. So I'm trying to see what we could do because we may have to live with it. So I don't actively oppose. Councilmember Zvonek, what's your position? So let's just take an overall position of it first. I don't actively oppose.
I like the idea of oppose if asked and try to work with to try to fix it, because Peggy's right. The politics of it are going to be that's going to pass. So if we can along the way make some changes, I think ultimately we should oppose it for a number of reasons. One, just the infringement on home rule, and I do think that we're going to run into unintended consequences down the road that are going to impact us in ways that we don't foresee right now. So I would say oppose if asked. And then in the meantime, work with whoever we can to try to make it as workable as possible, I guess.
And I'm happy to change my position to also opposed if asked, and see if along the way there's any room, for any type of these negotiations. But yeah, then I'll be opposed if asked.
Okay, it looks like the committee has decided to oppose if asked. So, but with the possibility to work with the recommendations.
Yeah, Councilmember Lawson, if I could, because my hope is, to Peggy's point, is that if along the way there's enough pressure from other municipalities, Dr. Cog, other groups that are like, hey, look, this is just not workable. if it starts to fall apart, I still wouldn't mind seeing that, a task force put together to explore something to address the need for, addressing our statewide housing shortage. That being said, I would much rather it be in a form of a study than something this comprehensive and sweeping that I think is just, it's going to have unintended consequences on all local governments and things that, like I said, I don't think we can foresee yet.
And Peggy, I have a question, because if this passes, which I believe it's going to pass in some regard, even if we, as opposed something of the bill, there's going to be rulemaking, correct? And so with the rulemaking process too, cities will be able to have impact on that or conversations on that as well. Is that correct or not?
Yes, that's correct. The city would be able to have input on the rulemaking. I think Liz's team can probably go into the detail on the limitations of that, though. The way they've drafted this, it gives DOLA quite a bit of decision-making process without the city's input. So I do think that's part of what needs to be expanded to make sure that there's a lot more local government impact and input on that process. But certainly the city will have some sort of role in terms of the rulemaking process. I just want to say, I think I feel pretty comfortable understanding the position of the city on this bill. We really don't like it. There's a lot of problems with it. Here are the delineation of our concerns. But understanding that we think there should be a deeper discussion on affordable housing. So certainly believe a task force would be appropriate. If we aren't able to get to that point, then I think there's a huge list of additional changes we'd suggest.
Okay, then Peggy, I have another question for you. So if the decision of the committee is opposed if asked, which I know a lot of municipalities, even CML kind of went with that, but we still have some bargaining at the table, right? I'm just asking on that. If we go in the city and say Aurora is opposed if asked, opposed to this bill, because I know I'm not saying it's a good bill, but if we do that, we still would have some bargaining or be able to speak on our possible amendments and concerns. Is that correct, or am I overstepping here?
No, for sure. We'll always be able to speak as to the concerns of the city. And we've got meetings set with our delegation already and additional legislators, as I stated, that I think are potential swing legislators on this. So I think we've certainly got the ability to go in, and we've already been raising concerns and putting a flag up on these issues. So for sure we'll have that opportunity.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like that's the position of the committee, with the hope that we can actually bring up some of the amendments, some of the additional amendments that we have regarding the task force, regarding transportation, the standalone on the model codes. So some of the things that we missed, I hope that we can add to it. Basically, we have a position, so we already taken the position. It looks like staff had a question for the committee. With the committee going with oppose, do we still, the question from the staff was, staff requests discretion from the Pfizer committee to draft and pursue amendments that will mitigate the impact of the legislation to the city of Aurora and to not to take an official position on this thing at this time. So I'm not going with oppose with ask. I'm gonna go with I support the question, the staff discretion to see, and then go from there. So am I reading this wrong, Roberto?
No, you're not. And so since we have that position, we'll simply, it's a moot point. So
Yeah,
we'll essentially,
I just want to say on record,
okay.
I supported the staff position to do this. My other colleagues, so I get superseded. So that will be the position of the committee, for the Pfizer committee, that will be to the legislators on this bill.
And just to clarify, I think for Peggy's comment, that still gives us an opportunity to still discuss our concerns, and we can still do that. I think that's fine. We'll still have that position officially. As a next step, also, we will provide backup for the full council and bring it to study session on Monday night, just so the full council can hear a very synthesized version, or at least have it in the backup of the council, of the staff concerns, and then the FSIR position, and then we'll have the full council weigh in. So if that's okay with you as the chair and the committee, we will do that as a next step, since I'm sure the rest of the council has a lot of interest in this bill as well.
Okay, and then I just have a question before I go to my colleagues. With this position that the city staff had taken, which I support, are you still going to talk with municipalities? I know that I've attended a lot of things with municipalities and groups to kind of mitigate this, still do that part of it as well. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I don't see any, I mean, we'll have that position, but yeah, we still will provide all the examples that we can to other municipalities, to legislators about what we're already doing, how this bill is an overreach, how it's addressing issues that we're already handling, how it creates new problems that we don't have right now in terms of occupancy and the code, et cetera, that have been spelled out. So yeah, I don't see any issues continuing with those conversations,
Okay.
as long as we're very clear about our official position.
Okay. All right. So is there any other questions from the committee? We have taken an official position from the committee. So that has been recorded, and that will be told to the full council at the study session on Monday. Is there any other questions, concerns, or anything that we need to address from the committee members?
None for me. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Jurinsky?
None from me.
Okay. Councilmember Mercano?
Additional this time, thank you.
Okay. Okay. I heard someone speaking. No. Okay. Well, thank you to the committee members for going through this bill. And I thank you, Liz. I thank you all of the city departments for providing input. And we will be discussing this at the study session on Monday. So thank you, everybody, for coming and attending the extra session. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.